Wales, Africa and the World, the podcast from Cymru Africa championing global solidarity and the connections between Wales, Africa and beyond. My name is Peter Gilbey, and in today's episode we'll be looking at Wales's Nation of Sanctuary policy. In 2019, the then Government of Wales published its Refugee and Asylum Seeker policy. This plan aims to ensure that individuals are supported to rebuild their lives and make a full contribution to our society. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Numair Masud, co-chair and treasurer of Glitter Cymru, an LGBTQ+ community group supporting LGBTQ+ global majority individuals, including asylum seekers and refugees. We're also joined by Beth Kidd, Head of Governance and Impact at the Welsh Refugee Council. The Welsh Refugee Council has for 35 years been supporting sanctuary seekers in Wales to build new futures here. So Beth, let's start on the actual Nation of Sanctuary policy. What is it?
So at its heart, it's about enabling people to integrate quickly. So one of the key principles is integration from day one, and it's enabling them to reach their potential and rebuild their lives, having fled some pretty horrific situations. Wales has a long history of welcoming people fleeing conflict and persecution, and the Nation of Sanctuary vision builds on that history, and is also kind of forward-looking in terms of making sure we recognise demographic changes and changes in labour market needs and things like that. But yeah, at its core, it's about kind of economic participation, social cohesion and community stability. As I'm sure everybody's seen, there's lots of rhetoric in the media and on social media about swarms of people and being overwhelmed, but immigration policy is not devolved, so it sits with UK government, and Wales receives about 3,000 people per year, which barely fills 3% of the Millennium Stadium, so it's not a huge number. But the Welsh Refugee Council is there to support people to help navigate systems like accessing education or healthcare or things like that, and ensuring that they can rebuild their lives and be the best version of themselves that they can.
So when one of those 3,000 people arrives here, what does this policy practically mean for them when they arrive here?
So it enables them to access language lessons, both English and Welsh. We've got a volunteering programme that enables people to both practice their kind of language skills, but also use the skills that they brought with them. We see so many people that just want to contribute and give back, and we don't want those skills to go to waste. So enabling them to volunteer, get that experience, and prepare them for when they do get a positive grant of status, and that they're ready to kind of hit the ground running, really.
Okay, so it comes in that pre-refugee state, where the asylum seeker status. Yeah,
but also post that as well. So when people get refugee status or a different grant of leave, it's about supporting people to into jobs, into work, into housing and that kind of thing.
So your role sort of lasts quite a long time then after they arrive. It's not just a short amount of time.
Yes, it does. And because we're often the trusted place that people feel understood and accepted and welcome, we quite often get people coming back with queries that actually it's not for us to help with. But it's nice that they feel that they've got that support there should they need it.
Because it's such a vulnerable time for them, right?
Yeah.
The relationships they build with you are probably their most trusted relationships. Yeah. So it's not surprising that they stick with you.
Exactly. And, we've got something like 60% of our staff have lived experience. We have 30-something languages spoken across the organisation. So just being able to communicate in a language that's natural to you makes such a difference. I mean, if you can imagine yourself, fleeing a horrific situation, landing in a country where you can't speak the language, can't read instructions, your child gets sick, you don't know, do you phone, do you go in person, where is the doctor, how do I get there, where's the, it is a very overwhelming and daunting situation. So just having that space where you can go and ask people, is this what I should do, is this normal, is this the right thing, really helps people feel safe and seen and heard.
How is this different to England or Scotland?
Yeah, so there are pockets of similar support across the other nations, and the Scottish Refugee Council do a lot of great work, but the Nation of Sanctuary vision is unique to Wales, and the kind of the support and the funding that's put behind that, from my understanding, isn't matched in the same level elsewhere.
I was reading up on this earlier in the week, and there's a lot of, as you just mentioned in your introduction, about rhetoric online, right-wing rhetoric, about the amount of money spent on it. You're saying that comparatively more is spent on this policy here because it's a national policy. It's still not that much money, though.
No.
It was 0.038% of the Welsh Government budget.
Yeah. So a tiny proportion.
It's tiny.
Yeah.
And it does so much good.
It really does.
It's effective use of money.
Yeah. So 90% of that budget was spent on the Ukraine programme when the war broke out in Ukraine. So it's 0.05% of the overall budget.
Is there a reason why the Welsh Government and Wales chose to pursue this policy, do you think?
I think, like I said, it's that history of welcoming people, of, we talk about the big Welsh welcome. It's just within people's DNA, I think, to see people as other humans and not as numbers or statistics or, other. It's, people need help. And Wales has been through tough times, right? And I think often the worse, the more you've experienced, the easier it is to relate to somebody else.
I think that relating is a key part of it, isn't it? And it's recognising that Wales is part of that global community.
Yeah.
They are shared problems, aren't they?
And equally, you'd hope that somebody else would offer you the same opportunity and welcome should that the same ever happen to us. I mean, we're in a lucky position that it's unlikely to, but,
Numair, how does what we've just talked about, me and Beth, align with your own experience?
So, look, I think it aligns really well. I think what you said, Beth, really echoes with me at a personal level, because fundamentally what I, as a former sanctuary seeker from Pakistan, would want, and indeed many of my friends and members of Glitter Cymru, 50% of whom are either asylum seekers or refugees, would want, is that social security, that economic stability, that respect, that understanding that all of us, by virtue of our humanity, deserve respect. And we all share the same fundamental human rights, regardless of our nationality, regardless of our country of origin. My personal story of asylum is a slightly unusual one, in that when we typically think of sanctuary seekers, i.e. asylum seekers and refugees, we think, and by we I mean the general public, typically thinks of people fleeing persecution, fleeing war, conflict, and indeed that is an important part of the sanctuary-seeking community. I, as a gay man from Pakistan, where it is criminalized to be a gay man, at the time that I claimed asylum, was with my ex-fiancée, who was from Nigeria. Both countries, former British colonies, where the anti-LGBTQ laws that persecute them are colonial entities. They are residues of colonialism, which we think has ended, but the echoes of colonialism, of empire, still very much affect us today. And I'm one example of that, many others, of course. So my personal story is one that is based on love, the fact that I fell in love with my ex-fiancée, and we wanted to do what I think most human beings want, is to be able to pursue a healthy relationship in safety without fear of persecution. So being a gay refugee or a gay asylum seeker, as I was in 2015, is something that isn't spoken about a lot. And I think that is something that requires more attention, because I still have to pinch myself to believe that there are over 60 countries today in the world that have anti-LGBTQ laws. A vast majority of them former British colonies. So my story is one that is, I'd like to believe, very, very human. And at the same time, I think it reminds us of the complex intersectionality between protected characteristics, that you could be a sanctuary seeker, and you could also be LGBTQ+. So you can sometimes experience the amplified discrimination of that intersectionality. So yeah, I really relate to what you said, Beth, and it is something that I think all human beings fundamentally crave.
You talked about coming from Pakistan and the impact colonial era laws had on you there. and your journey to becoming a sanctuary seeker. Can we talk a little bit more about that journey, how you came to Wales, and how you interacted with the nation of sanctuary policy?
When I came to the UK for the first time, so we should take a step back. So I came to the UK as a undergraduate student at the University of Bristol. So that's where I did my bachelor's, and I didn't really feel that welcome in England, to be perfectly honest. I really struggled to make friends. I remember being the only non-white person in my class when I was studying zoology. Not that that should matter, but I don't feel like I was actively included despite my efforts. I remember, people drawing weird things about me in my dorm, on the wall. I recall not feeling particularly welcome. And so I went back to Pakistan thinking, do I want to carry on my education? And I taught for a while. And then I realized I love science, I love research. And in an ideal world, I would be able to pursue that in Pakistan, but because of the social and economic conditions at that time, I wasn't really able to. And I knew I was a gay man. I was like, how am I supposed to pursue an open life in Pakistan? I don't want to live in the closet for all my life. I don't want to be repressed and oppressed. So I came back to Wales, to Cardiff University, where I did my research master's and then my PhD. And it's really during my master's that I started to explore being a gay man with relative freedom. Because we often forget that to be free is something that while we fundamentally crave it, but when you've been in hiding for so long, you don't often know what that's like. We take freedom for granted, and that freedom so many people are deprived of. And I think we all need to talk to more people who have come from parts of the world where civil liberties are restricted. So when I came to Wales, I suddenly felt a lot more freedom. I felt that Welsh welcome that Beth, you spoke so eloquently about. And so I completely agree. I think Wales is in a unique position. Now, at the time, the nation of sanctuary was still very much sort of being spoken about. And at the time, I didn't even know what the hell asylum was. Because I hadn't fallen in love with my partner at the time. And when I did and realized, oh, damn, how am I supposed to go back to Pakistan with my partner from Nigeria? We both come from countries that have clear anti-LGBTQ plus laws, and it is a criminal offense, and people die because they are attacked, and many are imprisoned. And I know many personal examples of that. And so I realized that because I do feel welcome over here, I have met a community. I have helped develop a community through Glitter Cymru of sanctuary seekers, but many others besides, international students, people who were born and bred in Wales, to come together to appreciate the diversity of humanity that makes our life so much more interesting, that makes our stories so much more interesting. Imagine living such a vanilla life where you only have one perspective. I mean, I find that rather dull and dark, really. So because I felt so incredibly welcome in Wales, and because I became more familiar with the nation of sanctuary through my interactions with the Welsh Refugee Council, and through members of Glitter Cymru who were working with and continue to work with the Welsh Refugee Council and the Welsh government as well, I realized, wow, Wales is really breaking ground over here, given the sort of right-wing rhetoric against not just sanctuary seekers, but LGBTQ plus individuals. And thereof, my story intersects with many others as well.
So you mentioned Glitter Cymru there, Numair. I'd like to explore Glitter Cymru a bit more. What is it? What does it provide?
The way I'll answer that question is to tell you an interesting story of how Glitter Cymru came into being. So before Glitter Cymru existed, my friendship with Vish existed, who is actually the founder of Glitter Cymru. So I met Vish, as one does, over a dating app. And I remember, I don't know why I remember this, but I remember meeting him at Costa, and they were very shy at the time, far from it now, as was I. And we were talking about how difficult it is for minoritized LGBTQ plus people to find a community. And my goodness, the amount of overt racism you experience online. So certainly I did personally, people saying, oh, well, we're not really into, non-white people or, Asian people, or, we're just so different. And you think, my goodness, are we a different species? And so it was this bizarre experience. And so Vish suggested that they wanted to start a group for minoritized LGBTQ plus people. And first I was a bit hesitant. I thought, hold on, aren't we already minoritized? Do we also want to create a group that sort of in some sense, would it box us in? So I thought about it, and they asked if I'd help them. And I said, you know what, let's go for it. Let's try this out. This was in 2015, before Glitter existed. It sort of formally came into existence in 2016 with really 3 or 4 people, and since has really blossomed to become, I would argue, Wales' largest LGBTQ plus global majority community. And what it represents is the sort of Welsh community spirit of togetherness. It is there to provide social and community support to minoritized, i.e. the global majority LGBTQ plus community, and about 50% of our members are sanctuary seekers, i.e. asylum seekers and refugees. And through our community level activism, we provide what is so essential to so many sanctuary seekers, which is not just that social integration within Wales more broadly, but also practical support, such as grocery vouchers, which I know the Welsh Refugee Council is involved with as well. I personally, as the treasurer and co-chair, have been very proud and fortunate to work on grants that have allowed us to support basic things that we often take for granted, such as cutlery for housing, which asylum seekers and refugees struggle with, trying to ensure that their home is not moldy, that they're not inhaling mold spores, which no one deserves, regardless of their nationality, regardless of their country of origin. So I really do think that Glitter Cymru, as an LGBTQ community support group, really provides fundamental support for sanctuary seekers. And of course, what we can't do, we effectively signpost to amazing organizations like the Welsh Refugee Councils and many others besides. Because what we all want to do as human beings, as sanctuary seekers, is to integrate, to belong.
How would someone like me, white person from Wales, how would I go about supporting Glitter Cymru? How would a new minoritized LGBTQ person in Wales interact with Glitter Cymru? Like, do you have a website, email? Yeah. How would someone get in touch with you?
Yeah. So Glitter Cymru is on all major social media platforms. So TikTok, we have a YouTube account, we're on Instagram. Our website is about to be launched, so watch that space. But we do have an email, glittercymru@gmail.com. So you can drop us an email. You can donate to us as well. We have a donation link, and which will also be added to our new website shortly. We meet once a month at Cardiff Central Library, and really that is our core opportunity to touch base with our community. And whether it's drawing with them, whether it's doing dance classes with them, whether it's singing with them, whether it's just talking to them about how their month went, those are the core opportunities for us to really understand how our community is doing. And that very much helps us shape how Glitter Cymru is run, because it is about the community, even though we have a central committee that helps navigate that space. But on a monthly basis, we really do talk to the community and socialize with them and try to understand what's going on and try to understand how we can help.
Beth, just to bring you in, last year, Welsh Refugee Council had the Nation of Sanctuary Awards, and Glitter Cymru won something. Why did they win?
Glitter won the Equalities Champion Award, and I think what really impressed the judges is that all the work they do is entirely volunteer-led. And as Numair has talked about, it's about that space of freedom, that space of belonging, but also being having the expertise in the intersectionality and how that impacts people, and using their expertise and knowledge to advocate for changes. So I know there was a piece of work done a while back around housing for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers, and ensuring that was appropriate and people were supported within that and their needs were met, which might be different to other sanctuary seekers' needs. But yeah, we had a wonderful night celebrating, and I think it was a very much deserved award.
And it really was an amazing night, because for me, at a personal level, I was there with my husband. So for me, that was really moving. It's not just about recognition. It's about realizing how important it is to appreciate the work of, as you say, volunteers all over Wales. Because, this job doesn't help me pay the rent at all. I'm doing this because it is the right thing to do. These are human beings that we are helping, and it is something that I get such personal, moral, ethical fulfillment from. And I encourage more people to operate in that space.
On that point of encouraging more people to operate in that space, what roles can people in Wales have in that space in building the nation of sanctuary, do you think, and working with Glitter Cymru?
Every year we do have an open event that encourages people who are all across Wales to engage with us, and that's typically in the form of our Glitter Pride that happens every year in August, and Welsh Refugee Council is usually involved in some capacity over there. But also following us on social media and forwarding our posts, engaging with us online, whether you want to donate to us, that's hugely appreciated. Literally every cent that you donate really helps minoritized communities, particularly sanctuary seekers. And raising awareness, I cannot emphasize how important that is, because even something as simple as language hygiene is incredibly important, just to be able to understand what an asylum seeker is. How is that defined in international law? And bringing the conversation back to human rights, which often it just isn't with our rather conflicted political landscape. It's so difficult to bring the conversation back to fundamental human rights. And those human rights documents are freely available online. How often do people read that? And I think just being able to talk about fundamental human rights that are, as the name suggests, fundamental, regardless of your economic status, where you're born, whether you're black, white, Asian, Iraqi, whatever your identity may be, those fundamental rights should not be violated. So there are multiple ways that I think people can engage.
If we sort of expand this more widely to global solidarity, so the work Hub Cymru Africa is doing, when we use the term solidarity, we talk about the work we do supporting partners abroad, the idea being we're a part of a global community. The issues far away are still our issues here. We're all human and we have responsibility to one another. How does that idea of global solidarity, of suffering far away being relevant to you here, how does that help us understand sanctuary in Wales?
I think it's fundamental. I mean, we've talked about fundamental human rights and standing in solidarity with people and saying, we agree this is your right, we support you. And it's that human connection, isn't it? It's, as I spoke before, seeing people as a person and taking the time to speak to them and help them practice their English, finding things that you can connect over. There are things, music and food and art and family that we've all got in common, no matter where you've come from. And building that relationship and that support for people, I think is really important. And as you say, not doing things to people, but taking the time to understand what they need and how you might be able to meet that need. And, as I said before, that if the tables were turned, that they would do the same for you, I think. And, a lot of people read about the rhetoric of people going to the front of the queue in housing things, or they're being put up in 5-star hotels, and that's just not the reality. People are accessing their rights the same as we access our rights, and they're not getting anything extra or anything more. And I think it's really important that we work to find a sanctuary that works for everybody. And one of the things that we've been looking at alongside the Sanctuary Coalition Cymru is that when people are able to work, so that's either after they've been waiting a year for a decision on their asylum claim, or if they've previously had the right to work on a different type of leave, they're only allowed to work on a very small list of occupations that has been decided by central government, and that's not necessarily something that works for Wales. So, for instance, we've got huge shortages in the construction industry, approximately 11,000 vacancies here in Wales, in healthcare and in social care as well. So we're calling for a specific devolved immigration salary list so that we can make sure that the gaps here in Wales are met.
And I think it's also worth reminding people in the global north and in the west that often advertise themselves as champions of free speech, of democracy, of civil liberties, is that if the argument is that we cannot have a constant influx, let's just assume for the sake of the argument that we're saying, well, look, the amount of refugees is on the rise, which is true. What are we going to do about it? And I appreciate that the nation of sanctuary doesn't necessarily deal with that in particular, but it is worth as us, as individuals, to reflect on where are refugees coming from? Where are displaced people coming from? And do we have a responsibility in generating those displaced people?
Absolutely.
And anyone with their head screwed on right knows that the answer is yes. Western intervention, which is ongoing, it does generate displaced people. And it is outrageous. It is outrageous that the West is saying, well, you know what, we're going to close our borders. We're going to generate refugees, but we're not going to look after them. At what point do you say that's madness? I mean, we know things like the Global Compact for Refugees exists. It's not sort of legally mandated, but no one at all is suggesting that the West has to take all refugees and displaced people. The vast majority of displaced people are looked after by the Global South, which is morally outrageous. The poorest countries often end up doing the most for asylum seekers and refugees. And how does the West look itself in the mirror and say, well, that's okay morally and ethically, we're okay with that? I mean, I mean, what does that say about us as a nation? Absolutely. That we look ourselves in the mirror and say, well, you know what, let those people over there look after people that we are displacing. If you think about sanctions in Iran, for example, I know we're sort of going off a little bit over here, but it's a perfect example because it's really topical. You know, that if you sanction a country, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, is that going to create economic migrants? Yeah. And I know that leads to the very politically charged conversation of worthy migrants. But, you know, if people don't have basic economic stability, what's going to happen to them? They're likely going to starve to death. So, yeah, if we support those sanctions, which are really illegal according to international law, we have to do something about that. We have to say, well, let's think carefully about who we're voting for. And for goodness sakes, do your homework. You know, I often say that to people. And I appreciate I'm often sort of quite blunt about it, but I think we do need to have a frank conversation more widely about human rights and how we treat each other, because the mainstream media and people in power are interested in power. They're interested in staying in power, whereas those of us who don't have that much power but have some degree of influence need to think about solidarity, need to think about being together.
If anyone deserves to put things bluntly, you have the right to, after your experiences. And you're absolutely right about those conditions that are creating the push factors. You're absolutely correct. There are very live, direct causes for that right now. But you did touch on it as well. There are historical legacies that are continuing to produce these conditions. That's where the overlap with the sector that Hub Cymru Africa works in sort of comes up. It's about really creating stability across the world, because refugees don't want to be refugees.
Absolutely.
They want to stay home.
Absolutely.
And make their home a success. So, you're absolutely right. Beth, we've been talking about the good work Nation of Sanctuary is doing, the struggles that refugees and sanctuary seekers face when they come here. Are we meeting the challenge wholly? Is there room for improvement? Is it all going smoothly?
I mean, there's always room for improvement, isn't there? And we're doing the best we can with what we've got. And I think, some of the key areas that are a massive challenge for us are the lack of legal aid availability, which is a bottleneck for so many things. If people aren't able to regularise their status, they're not able to access any kind of benefits or support, homelessness support. They're not obviously able to work. They're not able to they exist rather than actually live. And I think until that kind of challenge is resolved, there's going to be a lot of people experiencing really difficult circumstances, often rough sleeping or being forced to turn to the black market economy, just to basically survive. Other challenges that are faced are around access to mental health support, which I know is not specific to this sector. It's everybody is experiencing challenges, but sort of support that understands the situations people have come through and the things that they've experienced often takes quite specialist expertise. I think, we've talked about people wanting to use their skills and their knowledge and their talents. And as I've said, sanctuary seekers aren't allowed to work in the vast majority of sectors and skills. But they just want to give back. They want to be self-sufficient. They don't want to be reliant on funding or they don't want to have to live in a hotel that the government is paying for. They want to be able to support themselves. So I think, there's more that can be done.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also worth remembering is that if you treat a group of people so poorly, they're going to struggle to integrate, because often what we read about in the mainstream media is, oh, well, these people from a different culture, they have different belief system, they have different ideas, which is like saying the sky is blue, because even within the UK, you have people with different belief systems. Like, well, that wasn't a profound thought. It's like, we know that. It's like, that's obvious. That's not what's fundamentally different about them. Is that what is strikingly different about a group of people that are sanctuary seekers is the hardship that they face. That is quite unique. And if you increase those hardships, are they more likely to integrate or less likely to integrate? Once again, this is not rocket science, people. If you treat people like crap, they're much more likely to lash out. They're much more likely to be unstable. Yeah. I mean, these are such obvious things to think about. And so when we hear a lot of vitriol about, well, we need to kick them out, why are we supporting them, why are we helping them, we should push back and say, well, what do you think is going to happen if you don't support people? If you keep vilifying people, what do you think is going to happen? Is that going to create more peace and prosperity, which hopefully we should all be aiming for? Is there going to be more harmony? And no, that's not some woke liberal idea. That's common sense. Is why do you want to live in a world where there's more conflict? Unless there's something seriously wrong with you, is surely you would want to live in a world where there's more harmony. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can't even imagine what perfection looks like, but it has to be good enough that people don't feel as if they're drowning, which a lot of people feel as if they are. Yeah. Even if you put aside misinformation, disinformation, and manufacturing consent through the mainstream media and political agendas, we recognize that there is a lot of suffering in our nation and across the world.
And I think one thing that often people don't understand is the lack of choice that asylum seekers have and the massive negative impact that has, despite all they've experienced before, all they've experienced on the journey here. Having no choice over where you live, you have a tiny amount of money to live off. You're not able to work. You're not able to necessarily access higher education. The normal things, like you say, that we take for granted, that freedom, they don't have. And being stuck in limbo, and particularly over the COVID period when decision-making was slowed down, people were just stuck in this kind of nowhere space of not being able to move forward. Even if that was a negative decision, at least there was something happening. Yeah. And I think, people, I find it hard to imagine what that's like.
We've touched on it a bit with the rhetoric in the mainstream media, right-wing commentators. In May, Wales will be going to the polls to elect a new Senedd. What's at stake for Wales's commitment to solidarity and sanctuary? I
think if we lose the nation of sanctuary vision, it will be a massive backward step, morally, socially and economically as well. And I think people need to understand that and think hard about whether that's something they really want.
I think for me, for Glitter Cymru, for all sanctuary seekers, what is at stake is human lives, nothing more or less than human lives, because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about human beings, regardless of their country of origin, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their belief systems. The nation of sanctuary is about human beings, so that's what's at stake. And one need only think really carefully about what is the difference between a British national and a sanctuary seeker. Putting aside a lot of the sort of critical nonsense about, well, they have different belief system, like, okay. Or, they have, this cultural variation, they have another language, etc. Is what it really comes down to practically. The difference between a sanctuary seeker and a British national is often a piece of paper, a document. And that's it. Because most other things, can be taught. You can help with socialization and integration. That's the difference. So one need only think, if they're a British national, if they were born over here and they think, oh, they have security, all it takes is for people in power to suddenly realize that their interests don't align with your interests. And suddenly that piece of paper doesn't matter as much. And one need only think about the crackdown on protests, people being thrown in jail because of an ideology, because of a belief system. Think about what's going on in the US right now with ICE. It's so easy to remember how easy it is for people in power to turn against their own people, let alone vulnerable sanctuary seekers. That is the world we occupy today. So we really need to think critically. I know it's scary and it's so easy to scream and shout, but one really needs to pause and reflect on what is at stake is the future of humanity. Because whether we like it or not, the number of refugees is on the rise. I mean, not just wars, which are certainly on the rise, and there's a lot of link there to our political machinations, and by us, I mean the elite people in power. But think about environmental consequences. Think about rising sea levels. Think about climate change, environmental disasters. Think about economic and social instability. So the number of refugees, i.e. sanctuary seekers, is on the rise. Whether we like it or not, that's going to happen. So we need to ask ourselves, how are we going to move forward in Wales? Are we going to try to get along? Are we going to try to aim for harmony? Or are we going to say, no, let's pursue more conflict. Let's push back more because that'll help. I don't think it will. So the future of humanity really is at stake.
On that point, what you were talking about, the sense of instability sanctuary seekers must feel when their existence depends on these political decisions. You mentioned what's happening in the United States, where the rule of law, due process are being thrown out the window, and we can see the very real impact that's having on not just sanctuary seekers, but US citizens as well. You can see that there's a really fine line.
Absolutely.
And, how weak that piece of paper is that you mentioned.
Absolutely. Even in the UK, by the way. I mean, you just need to think about pro-Palestinian protesters, Extinction Rebellion, people who are sort of protesting environmental catastrophes. And that's why it's called a triple planetary crisis by the UN. I mean, you talk to any scientist or any expert in this field, they'll say as much. Now, we can either choose to listen to the experts, or we can say, well, I'm just going to spend a couple of hours on the internet and just read some comments and come up with my own ideas. I think also us as experts need to recognize that we have a moral responsibility to make ourselves more available. And that's certainly something I try through Glitter Cymru. But it's not just the US, it happens in the UK as well. More so. Far too many people who are practicing a basic civil liberty to protest, because how else do you have access to justice? How else do you have access to justice in the UK? I'd like someone to answer that question. The answer is, well, they don't. Vast majority of people don't. So yeah, they protest, and they're being thrown into jail.
To finish, I just wanted to ask briefly, you both, what gives you hope at the moment?
Young people. I think there's a lot of, a depth of understanding and a will to make a difference, and that old line, be the change that you want to see. I think, and especially I think in Wales, the fact that we are allowing young people to determine their own vote, I think is a really important thing. It's the little things. It's the resilience of human beings. It's the, seeing the tiniest change that can make somebody feel, you were talking about instability, and I was speaking to somebody the other day who said they haven't bought a wardrobe since they've had status for a couple of years, refugee status for a couple of years, haven't bought a wardrobe. They had, they lost the one in their country of origin when they had to flee. They then had one when they first arrived here, and then were moved around. And even though they've now got a stable home, they still can't bring themselves to stop living out because of the hostile environment and the sense that it will be taken away from you at a moment's notice. But they've recently got another job, and they're thinking about maybe buying a wardrobe, and that makes me, gives me hope that eventually everybody will be able to feel that way, that they are here and they're safe and that they can relax.
I really like that example. I should also say, what is the alternative to hope? Despair. We don't have a choice to indulge in that. There is an alternative to hope, but it's not something we should consider seriously. Without hope, what do we have? That might have been the last demon in Pandora's box. But there is just huge inherent value in hope. We cannot afford to indulge in despair, given that we are at a turning point in global affairs. You think about climate change, species extinction, pollution, you think about wars, you think about nuclear threats. There is so much that allows us to indulge in despair, but we really need to promote hope and give active examples, as you have, Beth, of people who are really trying to bring about positive change. And I think Glitter Cymru is an example of a community support group that is trying to do that voluntarily. And, that's one example for me, is do what you can to help others. I think that's fundamentally what it comes down to, is that we all have the same fundamental human rights, and that needs to be promoted at all costs. And Wales needs to promote that at all costs. We cannot afford to lose the vision of the nation of sanctuary.
I think it's important to remember that often the voices that shout the loudest aren't the most in number. And, you have to keep that faith in human beings, that people will see the humanity and understand that, the way that the loudest voices are pushing is not the way to go.
Beth, Numair, diolch yn fawr iawn.
Croeso.
So.
And that's it from Wales, Africa and the world. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Numair and Beth for joining us. The Welsh Refugee Council's Nation of Sanctuary Awards are currently accepting nominations, which are open until the 14th of February, covering 10 categories, including Volunteer of the Year, Young Person of the Year, and more. To nominate someone, search Nation of Sanctuary Awards 2026 in your favourite search engine. This has been Wales, Africa and the World. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you for listening.